This video is your guide to deck building in the Lord of the Rings, the card game. I'm Jackson Warfield, and I've been playing the Lord of the Rings, the card game since 2013. This video will document all of the strategies I've developed over a decade plus of playing the game. And at the end of today's video, we're actually going to build a deck on RingsDB.
I'll write it and we'll do it live!
When you're deck building, or as I like to say, constructing a deck, I specify the difference there because deck building, I really think, is more of a board game mechanic like in Dominion. Deck construction is broken into 4 different phases. You can apply these steps to every scenario in the game. The first step to deck construction in the Lord of the Rings, the card game, is deciding your information level. How much research you want to do before you even start building your deck. There are 3 different information levels you can operate at. The first information level is going blind. You haven't looked at the encounter cards. You don't know what the pregame startup instructions are. You know nothing about this scenario. You're going to come with a pre-made deck and just see how you do. The reasons why you would want to play blind. Already have a deck built, either from playing through campaign mode or just a deck that you really like playing, or maybe you really enjoy the challenge of Lord of the Rings, the card game, because I will say this game is challenging enough when you know what's coming in a scenario. It's extra hard if you don't, because different scenarios will require completely different strategies to beat, much less completely different decks. So if you want to go in blind, that's playing the hard mode, and to be honest, you're probably going to spend a lot of time adjusting your deck after you get stomped the first time you play. But if that's the way you like to play, blind is the information level for you. Alternatively, you could go in with eyes wide open. And you research the hell out of a thing. You're reading online of what kind of decks are good to beat the scenario. You're looking through all of the cards. You're trying to anticipate everything the deck's going to throw at you. If you're playing with friends, you're calling them up and talking through the scenario that you're going to play tomorrow night. Eyes wide open can be fun if you really enjoy deck construction. The downside of playing eyes wide open is you can only really anticipate so much from the scenario. You might find yourself overanalyzing certain aspects of an encounter. I'll use core set examples whenever relevant here, since everyone has the core set. You may find yourself strategizing around the Goblin Sniper in Journey Along the Anduin, only to find that when you actually play the scenario, the Goblin Sniper either never shows up or is barely an annoyance, much less something you build your deck around. So as the polar opposite to playing blind, you have playing eyes wide open. My preferred way to play the Lord of the card game is half blind. You take a peek at the scenario and you just check for pitfalls. Check for things that you're going to really feel silly if you built a deck without knowing it's coming. You're going to look for whether or not you have any battle stages or siege stages in the quest. A battle stage in a quest is where instead of using willpower to quest through a stage, you're going to use attack. Siege, you use defense. And if you build a deck with a ton of willpower, having no idea that you're going into a battle,
You're gonna have a bad time.
Other pitfalls. In the Escape from Dol Guldur, you might notice that the scenario begins with one of your 3 heroes trapped. You may not want to go with only one deck if one of your 3 heroes is going to get trapped. You're better off going with 6 heroes to start with, or maybe even 9 heroes. You're going to be missing 1 in the beginning. In general, you're looking for large enemies. You're looking for bosses. When we build the deck at the end of this video, I'm going to be talking a little bit about pitfalls in our scenario of choice. So you've decided now your information level. What's next? You're going to choose your heroes. This is when you decide whether or not you want to play the scenario with a friend. Well, I mean, that decision might be made independent of your deck construction. But if you're playing by yourself, you're going to be deciding whether or not you're playing one-handed or two-handed or three-handed or four-handed. It's a little complex when you play four-handed, to say the least. Even two-handed can be kind of complex, much less 3 or 4. I'm imagining giving someone a massage and trying to convince them that you have 4 hands and being that fast with your hands there. I don't know if you'll be able to pull that off. The choice between going one-handed and two-handed comes down to how much you want to massage your deck, I guess. You're going to have an easier time managing a single deck in Lord of the Rings, the card game, but the downside of playing with only one deck is you have to cover all of your bases with only 50-ish cards. If you play two-handed, it's going to be more of a cognitive load when you're playing the game, but you have more tools available at your disposal, and you'll probably have more fun deck building because you can have one deck, for example, that's heavy into questing and one that's heavy into fighting. You can use cards you might not have ever gotten to the table with a single deck. Today's example, we're just going to build a single deck, but the strategies for building a single deck and building 2 are really very similar. The next choice you have to make with your heroes is to choose what type of archetype you want to lean into. In general here, you're picking traits. especially with all the revised content, those are the main types of decks that you build. In the earlier years of the game, you'll have deck types such as monosphere decks or secrecy decks. That's less of a thing with the revised content for Lord of the Rings, the card game. You're more so going to want to pick a trait and run with it. So, for example, Rohan or Gondor. Today we're actually going to be building a Dunedain deck. You're not sure what archetype to pick, and it can be a tough decision because not all archetypes are going to work well for every scenario. Look at the cards released against the quest you're trying to defeat. Today, for example, we're going to be deck building for an Angmar Awaken quest, and we're going to be building a Dunedain deck. Why? Well, the Dunedain cards in the Angmar Awakened Hero expansion are meant to go with the Angmar Awakened campaign cards. So you can assume pretty safely that Dunedain cards are going to do well there. This is another reason why, for new players of Lord of the Rings, a card game, I recommend buying all of the starter decks because they just give you more archetypes to play with. And they all synergize decently well with cards from the core set. The next thing you need to consider with your heroes are the spheres you're pulling from. In Lord of the Rings, a card game, you need to have lore heroes to collect lore resources to pay for lore cards. You need to have tactics heroes to collect tactics resources to pay for tactics cards. These are different spheres. You also have leadership and spirit, so those are your 4 spheres. When you're building a single deck, you're most often going to go with a 2-sphere deck. The reason why is it's the most manageable balance between variety and efficiency. 3-sphere decks are doable, but you'll find yourself short for resources, each of them having only 1 hero to naturally build resources. A 2-sphere deck, having 2 heroes in sphere A and 1 hero in sphere B, at least one of your spheres is going to have much more resources coming in. It's possible to get a 4-sphere deck or a quad-sphere deck because some cards will add secondary spheres to your heroes, but that is definitely for advanced playing, and you could also go monosphere, but now all the weaknesses of your sphere of choice are going to be very common throughout your deck. It's the easiest to build a 2-sphere deck. Next comes 3-sphere, then comes monosphere, and then comes quad sphere. If you're ranking the spheres by how powerful they are out of the core set, the rankings go spirit, leadership, lore, tactics. Leadership is great with resource generation. Spirit is great with willpower. It's pretty inarguable that spirit and leadership are the top 2, and lore and tactics are the bottom 2. So only do a tactics and lore dual sphere deck if you really want to challenge yourself. And the last step while you're choosing your heroes is to choose their roles. In general, you want to make sure at least one of your heroes is good at defending, at least one of your heroes is good at attacking, and at least one of your heroes is good at questing. Chances are you're not going to use your heroes in that way every single round. You may want to have a hero that's good at either attacking or questing, but at the very least, you generally need one hero to be good at each of the phases of the game. If you're dependent on allies to do all of your defending, it might put you in a tough spot. Some scenarios will mandate that you can't support all 3. You might have to go really heavy into questing for certain quests. But if you're just building a deck out for a scenario you've never played before and you don't know what you need to do yet, try to make sure you're picking heroes that cover the bases pretty well. I wouldn't recommend choosing 3 flexible heroes that could do everything because 3 jack-of-all-trades style heroes are going to be weaker in each phase. To use core set examples, you're going to have a better time with a deck of, say, Éowyn, Legolas, and Denethor as your quester, attacker, and defender than you would with Beravor, Aragorn, and Gimli. Looking at the threat cost of those 2 starting sets of heroes, you're getting a lot more bang for your buck and getting a lot more rounds out of the game with the specialist group as opposed to the super flexible group. All right, so now you've chosen your information level. You've chosen your heroes, and it's time to now build out your deck. I like to use RingsDB as a deck builder, but you can obviously do this just by looking through your card pool, especially if you have them well organized. First step to building your deck is to get any hero-specific boosts to get those heroes to work. For example, if you have Elrond from the Elves of Lorien starter deck, you need to have Vilya because that's what Elrond does. In theory, you could go without Vilya, but I wouldn't advise it. Similar for, say, Galadriel and Nenya. If you have Aragorn from the core set, you need to get Celebrian Stone. If you have Legolas from the core set, you're probably putting the Blade of Gondolin in your deck. A lot of these cards, Gimli gets the Citadel Plate. A lot of hero cards just have the no-brainer combos, and you want to get those in there first. And while we're in the build phase here, you're going to add the maximum number of cards you have. So if you have 3 copies of a card, just start out by adding all 3 whenever you add a card, regardless of whether or not it's unique or a non-unique card. The exception to that being cards like Path of Need, where you're limited to 1 per deck. Obviously, if you don't have cards, you could limit yourself to say, all right, I only have 2 copies of this. You could do proxies if you want, but I like to save proxying for later as a, in case of emergency, break glass and find this proxied card with, the post-it note inside the sleeve to say what it really is. I like to try and beat quests without using proxies if possible. Once you have your hero-specific staples, the next step is to add your gems of the core set. I'm going with gems because I like it better than staples. The core set has certain cards that are universally regarded as strong cards, and you will be hard-pressed to build a strong deck without at least a few of these. All of the scenarios in Lord of the Rings: The Card Game are built assuming you have these cards available to you. For example, you'll see some scenarios where they'll limit the number of locations in the staging area which you can drop progress on because they know everyone has access to the Northern Tracker, which can kind of just clear out locations. It's a strongly held belief that leadership cards from the core set are more expensive than non-leadership cards because Steward of Gondor is available in the core set as well. Here are the gems of the core set. For leadership, the gems are Steward of Gondor, Sneak Attack, and Faramir. Sneak Attack obviously is going to go with Gandalf. If you have to drop one of these, I would drop Faramir. For Spirit, you have a Test of Will, Hasty Stroke, the Galadrim's Greeting, Unexpected Courage, and Northern Tracker. Arguably, you also have Dwarven Tomb. There are so many gems in the Spirit that it actually becomes less fun to make a Spirit deck. At least 15 slots in your deck dedicated to the same cards every time. If you have to drop cards here, I would first drop the Galadrim's Greeting, Northern Tracker, and Dwarven Tomb, and then probably Hasty Stroke. Test of Will and Unexpected Courage are just too good. You gotta keep those in there. For lore, there's only one gem, and it's Henemarth River Song. All the other lore cards, while often useful, are either underwhelming or too expensive to be really considered gems. Henemarth, especially if you're trying to beat a scenario one-handed, is absolutely a gem. Then for tactics, the only gem is Feint. There are, again, a lot of very useful cards in Tactics, but Feint is the only one where you really need to go with every copy that you have. And of course, you have the neutral card Gandalf. Gandalf is a gem. Gandalf can be included in just about any deck, and the only reason why you're not including Gandalf is either because you're trying to challenge yourself or because you're trying to be thematic in a way where Gandalf doesn't fit. It will often frustrate a lot of Lord of the Card Game players too that some of these cards are very thematic. For example, Steward of Gondor, you'll hear people call Steward of Dwarf Door or Steward of whatever because they don't like putting Steward of Gondor, for example, on a dwarf. Henemarth River Song is obviously a Sylvan ally that might be a weird addition to your dwarf deck just to pick one trait, but those are the gems. Now you've got your hero staples and the gems of the core set. Now you're just going to lean into the synergies. You want to comb through your cards and look for any possible synergies. You're not worrying about staying inside your 50 card limit right now. You're putting all of your options on the table. And again, you're putting 3 cards at a time out there. If you're using a website like RingsVB, like we will use, you can search for traits to make sure you're not missing, for example, any Dunedain cards in your Dunedain deck. You also want to look through card text. For example, look for, if you have Aragorn, look for any cards that have Aragorn in the card text. If you're using Secrecy, you want to look at threat management or the number 20. So you're searching for all the possible synergies here and just putting it on the table. After you've done this, you're likely to have somewhere around 70 cards now, which brings us to that final step. Step 4, refine the deck and bring it back down to 50 cards. So in the building the deck, you're making your chunk of marble, and then refining your deck, you're carving it into your statue of David. First thing you want to do when you're refining your deck is count up the number of allies, attachments, events, and side quests that you have. Now, sometimes you're going to want to go with side quests. You might not have any side quests. So counting off of a 50 card deck, the numbers you want to keep in mind here are about 24 or so allies, about 9 attachments, and 17 events. These are good nominal numbers. You don't have to be exactly at these numbers, but if you're close, you'll be set up for most scenarios. There are so many different spots where having a good number of allies are going to help you. Attachments are also useful, but they tend to be less useful than allies. You need to have the ally or the hero in play first to get the attachment out there. And like allies, you can only play them in the planning phase. Whereas events, you have more event cards. You can play them whenever you want throughout the course of a round. So having a lot of events, more events than attachments, is a good investment. If you play a quest that will penalize you for having too many allies, maybe you do want to have more attachments to beef up your heroes instead. But 24, 9, and 17 are my mental targets. Another thing you want to strongly consider is removing any cards that take more than 2 turns to save up for. If you're going with a leadership tactics deck and you have 2 leadership heroes and 1 tactics hero, you're going to want to be hesitant to include any tactics cards that cost 3 or more, because those will take you, without modifiers, 3 rounds or more to save up for. That's a long time. You will almost never play a 3-cost card for a sphere you only have 1 hero for. Obviously, you can adjust this with resource generation, but you should just be very hesitant to have too many of those cards at that cost point in your deck. For a sphere that you have 2 heroes for, you're going to want to be really hesitant to put any cards of cost 5 or 6. And thankfully, there aren't that many of those anyway. So you can kind of do whatever you want for a sphere where you have 2 heroes. Because neutral cards can come from any sphere, you can kind of put any neutral card in there as well. Gandalf being a 5-cost card, it takes 2 turns to save up for Gandalf and you still get a resource left over. Now, after you've made your initial reductions for just getting the super expensive cards out of your deck, or at least limiting the number of them that you have, I like to do a little activity called Check Your Engine. And this is a simple counting exercise that I do to make sure that I'm not building up more resources than I'll be able to spend or drawing more cards than I'll be able to buy. So it's a check against your card draw and your resource generation in the deck. Here's how you check your engine. In a given game of Lord of the Card Game, you can expect the game to last maybe about 10 turns. That would example be starting with 30 threat and then having your threat go up on average 2 per turn. 1 by the round naturally progressing and another threat increase by card effect. Across these 10 rounds, you will naturally generate 30 resources. At the same time, you will start the game with 6 cards in your hand and you will draw 1 per round. So that's a total of 16 cards. Now remember, you have a 50 card deck. That's actually very light. This is partially why card draw is so important in Lord of the Rings: The Card Game, is because your natural card draw barely taps into your deck. Over the course of 10 rounds, if you don't amp up your card draw in any way, you can't even expect to play 2 cards per round. You won't have enough cards available. You want your resources available to be about double the number of cards that you have available, but you also want to increase the number of cards you have available because you're going to have to get lucky to beat a scenario without any card draw enhancement. So here's how you now incorporate the cards you've actually chosen into this number. If you have a hero that adds 1 resource per turn, you just add 10 resources to your total resource for the game, just as a rough number. So Theodred, for example, you can say adds 10, maybe be a little conservative, add 9 resources to your total. So Theodred will bring you up to 39 resources available in a game. A hero that adds card draw, like Barivor, you'd say, okay, well, maybe you're going to use Barivor for card draw on half the rounds in the game. And because Barivor draws 2 cards each time, you'd say, okay, Barivor is going to add 10 cards. So if I have Barivor and Theodred, my counts are now up to 39 and 26. So that's not quite at the double point. I can maybe use a little bit more resource generation, but that's not too far out of balance, all things considered. Obviously, you have also cards in your deck that will add card draw or add resources. A good rule of thumb is that for each card in your deck, assume it'll be in play for 2 rounds. So you can say Gleowin is going to add 2 cards to your total for the game on average. If you have 3 copies of Gleowin, that's adding 6 because there's a much higher chance you get Gleowin into play. So you do this for the significant cards in your deck. You don't have to do this for absolutely every card. Maybe one day I'll build this out into a more complete system, but you just want to use this to eyeball whether or not you have too many resources or not enough resources to support your card draw.
Guess wrong, and the planet will explode, and probably the solar system, because I kind of eyeballed the neutrino bombs on this one.
Very often when playing this game, you'll end up with a mountain of resources that you can't spend. You don't want to be in that situation. And the last step to refining your deck, take the cards that are the least useful by your gut feel and remove them from the deck while keeping an eye on your deck's potential weaknesses. A deck has to do 3 things, especially if you're playing single-handed. You have questing, which is maintained through, obviously, willpower, but also encounter card cancellation, exploring locations, dropping progress. Any effects like that are helping your willpower and your questing. You have your surviving, which involves defending. So having characters with strong defense numbers, at least 2, potentially 3 or 4 defense, that's a strong defender. Having a lot of allies is good defense because you now have chump blocking as an option for you, where you just use little cheap allies to defend against big attacks. And the big attacks don't really impact your board state that much. Threat reduction comes in here too, because that'll extend the game, as will shadow effect cancellation, because that will make incoming attacks weaker. All of this will help keep you in the game long enough to then put together strong questing round. And then the last potential weakness of a deck is attacking. If you have a hero or a couple allies that have very strong attack numbers, you probably have attacking under control. If you have a lot of allies, especially a lot of allies that have at least 2 attack, they can all attack together when you need to go take out a boss. So that's how you make sure you have attacking under control. But if you have a lot of allies with 1 attack or less, and you don't have a hero that has a way to get a big attack, like say Core Set Gimli or Tactics Eowyn, attacking might be a bit of a weakness for you. Now, I can only give some specific of instructions on how to build your deck within this because, one, you've been leaning into your synergies, and your synergies are going to naturally reveal certain strengths and weaknesses with your deck. And 2, different scenarios are going to require different strengths as well. But you want to be mindful of what these are, because if you lose the first time you play a quest, you want to know how you lost. Like either all your heroes got destroyed or you just couldn't get the questing together and you ended up just getting overwhelmed. Maybe you didn't have enough questing prowess. Maybe you never just could beat the final boss, and then adjust your deck for future plays accordingly. So to repeat, the 4 phases for deck building. 1, choose your information level. 2, choose your heroes. 3, build your deck. And 4, refine your deck. If you want to see this in action, we're going to do it. We're going to do it live right now. Let's go build a deck.
We'll do it live. Okay. We'll do it live!
Welcome to Rings DB. We're gonna build a deck for the Lost Realms expansion, or the Angmar Awakened campaigning scenario, Intruders in Chetwood. Now, before I get started, a few things here. So for Rings DB, I've set my collection to be as if I were someone that only owned 1 core set. The Angmar Awakened and Lost Realm hero cards and player cards, those are the ones that come with the Angmar Awakened hero expansion, the revised expansion, and the 4 starter decks. All right, so not someone that has a complete collection by any stretch, but someone with enough cards that you can do some deck building. Jumping over here, we're going to be building today's deck half blind, which means we're going to take some peeks at the scenario and try and get an idea of what type of cards we need to just avoid getting totally stomped by a scenario. We're going to go with a Dunedain deck because Dunedain decks are fun. There's a little bit of variety off of the starter decks, so it's not just taken straight from a starter deck. And because Dunedain as an archetype was released at the same time as the Angmar Awakened quests, you can reliably think that these scenarios should be beatable with Dunedain. If you want to do quest research, one way to do it is by going to Hall of Beorn, which is a great website. Hall of Beorn, I've clicked on the Intruders in Chetwood scenario here. So you go first to products, then go to, in this case, the Lost Realm, and then Intruders in Chetwood. And you can scroll down here and you can take a look at some of the encounter sets. And as we look through here, I'm just going to mention the things that I am noticing as we look at these cards. So these are the Angmar Orcs. One thing I'm noticing with the Angmar Orcs is they seem to really like fighting allies. So you would get advantages here by pumping up your heroes instead of having a ton of allies. So I'm putting that note in the back of my mind. Eriador Wilds. All right, so looking here, I see some mentions of side quests. So we have actually a number of quests in play. So some fighting against side quests here. So these are cards to discourage you from going too hard with the side quests. The actual Intruders in Chetwood. Wow, that's a big guy here. Let me just zoom out so you actually can see. The Orc War Party cannot have attachments, and that's a big beefy enemy here. And when they're in the staging area, enemies in the staging area can't take damage, so that's forcing you to engage. A lot of engagement effects here. Some forced engagements. At one point, you're going to have to do a side quest to rescue Iarian, and Orc Rearguard is another side quest you'll want to take care of quickly. So you need cards that can handle side quests. Whether or not you should have your own side quests is an open question. If you're preparing for side quests anyway, you may want to include some side quests in your deck because you're going to be prepared to go into side quests, but we know there are some cards here that are going to penalize you for doing just that. All right, so jumping back over to Rings DB, I'm going to go to my collection, go to decks. This is using a burner account here because it's easier to set my collection here. So I'm making a new deck here on Rings DB, going to build. Now, I want to make, as I mentioned, a Dunedain deck. So I'm going to start by picking out Dunedain heroes. Rings DB, because I've set my collection to be the cards that I have to play with, is already filtered all the options to be just cards from those sets. Filter traits with a K, colon, and then I do Dunedain, if I don't need to get the accents on the letters. This is showing me all of the Dunedain heroes across all of the spheres, and this is the hero filter right here. This would be allies, if I want to look at allies, attachments, events, and side quests. We're not worried about contracts right now. So our choices are Amarthiel, Core Set Aragorn, Lost Realm Aragorn, Core Set Barivor, and Lost Realm Halbarad. I'm going to go with a 2-sphere deck, and I'm going to go with maybe a mix here. I'm going to do Barivore as my 1 lore hero to make sure to get some card draw here. Barivore is a very strong hero. I'm going to go with Halbarad because I don't want to go with all core set heroes either. Halbarad gets a boost when you're engaged with an enemy where he automatically readies himself. Rather than going 3-sphere here with Tactics Aragorn, or you actually could try to go 3-sphere with Amarthiel as well by he gets the Tactics icon. I'm a little bit concerned about my ability to quest if I go with Amarthiel, so I'm going to do core set Aragorn. So those are my heroes.
Quick editor's note here. If it looks like I've violated one of my rules and added 3 flexible heroes to the deck, here are the 2 reasons for that. 1, Dunedain doesn't have a lot of other options. Amarthiel is a little bit of a defense specialist, but I went with Halbarad over Amarthiel because Halbarad has that action advantage where he can go questing as well, and Dunedain isn't particularly strong with questing. Also, Amarthiel taps into tactics, and Dunedain tactics is better equipped for when you're playing two-handed because you have range characters and then you're taking the engagements away from other teams. So that's why the heroes seem to be violating one of my rules or one of my recommendations here.
I'm going to go with 3 copies of Faramir. Now, of note, the Rings DB doesn't like it when you choose Faramir from 2 different sets, but that is totally legal to have 3 copies of Faramir that way. So I have 2 copies of Faramir from the core set and 1 copy from Defenders of Gondor. I'm also going to go with Steward of Gondor and Sneak Attack. So those are my gems of the core set. If I can find Sneak Attack. There it is. I also want to get Gandalf. I'm also going to be sure to get Henemarth River Song from the core set and from Elves of Lorien. So those are my core set gems. So I've used up 14 slots in my deck so far, and it's time to start synergizing. I'm going to filter my cards here on leadership, lore, and neutral cards, even though Aragorn, you'll see, has a way that he could actually get a spirit icon. My intent here is not to go up to a 3rd sphere. I'm really going to try and lean into leadership and lore. First step here, I'm going to search for Dunedain allies. I'm going to filter on the allies. And looking down here, just to start with, I'm going to throw all of these allies into the deck. Again, I'll be peeling this back later, but none of these Dunedain allies are immediately auto not includes. Like they're all conceivable that you will want to use it. Although I should remember that Ranger of the North, you can't actually include in your decks. So what I'll do in Rings DB, he's a sideboard character. What you do is you put Ranger Summons, which is an event card, into play, and then it brings a Ranger of the North into the encounter deck. So that's how Ranger of the North works. Then we'll keep that in mind when we're looking at the total count for cards in the deck, because I'm actually going for 53 cards here because the 3 Ranger of the North cards on the sideboard don't count towards your deck total. Now, one of the other nice things about this deck is Halbarad, Barivore, and Aragorn are all not only Dunedain, but also Ranger cards by trait. So I'm going to look for some Rangers, and I'm going to put them in here. Emin Arnon Ranger is the only addition here because it's a Gondor Ranger and not a Dunedain Ranger. So I've already have the other Rangers here. I'm going to do a real quick search through the allies for anyone that says engage in my card pool here, because that's a big aspect of Dunedain synergy, because they get stronger the more enemies you engage, Halbarad being the best example of that. And there are no other extraneous cards here, so I'm going to move on to attachments and events and side quests. For simplicity's sake here, I'm going to go over to side quests, and I'm actually going to consider just putting these side quests into play. Side quests are cheap, and they're only 1 copy each in your deck. There's something that after a play, I may decide to remove this from my deck, but I'll just put the 3 side quests here that I have available within the leadership, lore, and neutral spheres and move into allies and events, just to simplify it a little bit. First thing I'm going to look for is the Dunedain word in the card text. So the way you search for that in Rings DB is with the X. The filter help, by the way, is up here, so you can actually see how to search for certain cards. So within the Dunedain cards here, we have, let's sort actually by sphere. You have Descendants of Kings for readying, Heir of Valandil to reduce cost of cards. It's effectively the same as increasing your resources. Ranger Summons, I need to get the 3 Ranger Summons. Sword of Numenor for resources. Then I have Athelas for healing and Quick Ears, which allows you to manage your encounter cards. So I'm just going to throw these all in here. I'm going to do the same thing for Ranger cards. I can't do Coney in a Trap because I don't have a Warrior. Well, actually, I may have a Warrior in here somewhere, but I'm not leaning into the Warrior trait very much. Do I have a Warrior here? no.
The temperature in Atlanta is 64 degrees.
Can't do Coney in a trap. Ranger or Scout, I could do Distant Stars. Allows you to discount and replace a location. Expert Trackers is another way to get progress in play. Ranger Spikes is a trap. I don't know that I'm going to lean into trap decks. But if Ranger Spikes here goes with the other trap card that I have here, Emin Arnin Ranger. Weather Stain, Cloak, those are the cancel damage as it's dealt to you. That one we might not need for these scenarios, but we'll put it in there to start with. And Wingfoot, which is a readying effect that goes very well with Hennemarth Riversong. If you know it's coming in the deck, you can use Wingfoot. So I have the Ranger cards and the Dunedain cards. All right, now looking at my deck so far, I have 70 cards. Obviously, I need to dial this back a little bit. In theory, you could go with 70 cards. I wouldn't recommend it. And I'm going to go category by category here to try and trim the fat. Looking at the allies, I'm looking at not only probably more lore allies than I want, but they're kind of expensive as it is. Now, I should have good resource generation here, but I'm going to cut the Emin Arnin Rangers, and I'm also going to cut the Ranger Spikes. Both could be helpful, especially when working together, but I want to be careful not to do too many things, and because I'm only attaching... So I'm only putting here one trap card. You see, I only have... I could put a Forest Snare, which actually could be an interesting, nice improvement. Ithilien Pit doesn't really work with my strategy because I want to engage the characters, not attack them while they're in the staging area. Forest Snare is kind of expensive because I only have one lore hero. I'm going to go away from the Ranger Spikes. So I'm going to drop the Ranger Spikes, and I'm going to drop the Emin Arnin Ranger. That's bringing me down to 64 cards. I'm at 26 allies. I could afford to drop a few more allies here. Faramir being a unique ally is a little expensive, so 3 cards have cost 4. So I'll just go with Faramir from the core set. Now I'm at 25 allies. If you remember, you will be penalized a little bit for having allies coming out of your deck or from using allies to defend. So I'm looking at some of these guys. Son of Arnor, I may end up cutting, but let's move on to the other categories because we might be already fine. Attachments at 18 attachments, that's a lot of attachments. This is a quest where you consider having a lot of attachments. If you are disincentivized from using allies, what you need are strong heroes in place. And oh, I have forgotten here. I need to get Aragorn's card, Celebrian Stone. 1 copy. You need to have Celebrian Stone if you're going with Aragorn. Now, that will also give him access to the Spirit Sphere, but I'm not really planning to use that now. Maybe if I need to adjust this deck later, I'll add Spirit cards, but with only 1 copy of Celebrian Stone, I'm just going to use it for its +2 willpower if it were to come up. So I need to keep that as an attachment. Now, going through my attachments, I have a lot of resource generation. Now, I could do the count exercise here. Steward of Gondor. Each copy of Steward of Gondor, if you expect it to be in play for 2 turns, generates 2 resources per turn. So say that's 6 turns then of Steward of Gondor at 2 resources each. That's plus 12 resources. That's up to 42 resources for the game. Heir of Valandil can reduce the cost of allies that you play. So if you want to reduce the cost by, say, 1 and 2 separate turns, so that's a total of savings of 6. So that's another 6 points for your resource count, really. Now up to 48 for resources, and then Sword of Numenor with 3 copies of this. You get 2 resources when you use it, but you only get 1. You don't get any, but you have a condition here. You have to actually defeat an enemy to get it. So talking about another 3 resources added to your total here. I think I have too many resource generating cards because I also don't have any card draw. Well, I shouldn't say I don't have any. I have Gandalf and I have the Sarnford Sentry, which is a 3-cost ally, which is going to be a little bit tough to get into play. I'm going to add Daeron's Runes here. Daeron's Runes, if it were in the core set, would be one of the gems because Daeron's Runes really just shrinks your deck size. By drawing a card and discarding 1, yeah, you discard a card that you might have wanted, but you still get a card effect. You get to often just discard a card that you wouldn't have used anyway. I see each copy of Daeron's Runes as effectively reducing your deck size by 1. And the reason why you have a minimum deck size instead of a maximum deck size is because you want to be using the good cards as readily as possible, and you do that more often with a small deck. So Daeron's Runes is a good card here. I'm going to add that in to get more card draw. But I'm going to dial back my resource generation a little bit. Because Steward of Gondor is a unique card and Heir of Valandil is a unique card, I'm going to cut my copies of those cards by 1 each. That's another thing I'll do is often with the uniques, go with 2 copies just because there is a decent chance that you end up with more than one copy of a card. Looking now, the Weather Stained Cloak, I don't know that I need this one because I could go back and look, but I don't believe any of the cards were like the Necromancer's Reach, where they just do damage to characters while they're committed to a quest. So I'm going to remove the Weather Stained Cloak. Where is that here? So that takes out another 3. I'm also going to remove Athelas, which is a good healing card. I don't know, maybe I'm going to keep Athelas. I'm going to drop Wingfoot down to 2 copies because it's unique. I don't want to drop Hennemorth Riversong down to 2 copies, but I'll drop Wingfoot down to 2 copies. Now I'm at 61 cards. If I'm going over to events here, I'm going to remove Distant Stars and Quick Ears because they are replacement cards. So they're cards that, while potentially useful, especially Distant Stars, the fact that you're just using them to replace them with other cards, especially Quick Ears, I'm going to go away from them. Plus, I already have, for Quick Ears costing 1, I already have plenty to save up my lore resources for with East Road Ranger and Sarnford Sentry. So I'm going to drop Quick Ears and I'm going to drop Distant Stars. I'm at 55 cards. As I'm looking through this, there's one other thing I wanted to search for, and it's for any cards that do better when you have a side quest. Dunedain Message, I don't think I'm going to do that one. I got the East Road Ranger. I'm going to look again for more card draw effects here. Long Defeat's a potential good one. Long Defeat you can attach to a quest card in play. When you complete that side quest, you get the Long Defeat benefit, which is drawing 2 cards or healing 5 damage. That could replace Athelas, but we already have 55 cards. I really like the cards we have left. There's a Dwarf card. Valiant Sacrifice is a good card draw card, and Pillars of Kings really more if you're going for a Valor deck. I will generally, especially in the first deck, I will avoid using cards that are clearly part of a different strategy than the one I'm using, just because the chances that they're beneficial are lower. Maybe after playing a deck a few times and knowing exactly what I need, I might go find a card like Pillars of Kings and bring it in. But I'm going to avoid that for now. I'll say one thing that I have none of in this deck is any kind of threat management. I have to say, I'm very tempted to put Favor of the Valar in play to make sure that I don't threat out. So I'm going to put 2 copies here of Favor of the Valar, because you really don't need all 3, and you got a ways to go before you need 1. I'm going to check here for any shadow effects here. Dark Knowledge I generally don't think is worth it, especially because these heroes only have 2 willpower. I will say I think one of the weak points is this deck is also questing. East Road Ranger will be useful when I'm going for any side quests. Faramir is going to be a very important card for getting a good questing push. Gandalf, when I play him, I'll probably use him for card draw and for questing. Guardian of Arnor is my defender, at least my ally defender. Hennemarth Riversong is going to help make sure that I can handle what's coming in the quest phase, which might be a little bit of a weak point. Ranger of Cardolan is just an all-around strong card that'll enter and leave play. Sarnford Sentry, after doing its effect, is going to be questing for 2. Son of Arnor, we'll see. Maybe we'll end up swapping out the Son of Arnor later. And Weather Hills Watchman, I'm going to actually cut the Weather Hills Watchman because I'm not playing with any signal cards. And if his main ability is around signal cards, I'm not going to do that. I'm at 54 cards. 22 allies, a little bit less than usual, which is fine. 15 attachments, 14 events, 3 side quests. I'm over by 1 card if I really wanted. I could see dropping a copy, maybe Hennemarth Riversong, but he's good enough that I'm going to keep it at 3. I'd rather have 3 copies of Hennemarth and be at 51 cards than 2 copies and be at 50. So that's my deck. So I'll go ahead and build this and give it a shot and make adjustments depending on how it does. Now, I'm not going to play that in this video, but if you'd like to see me play this deck out, let me know. Maybe we'll make a future video that does exactly that. And if you want to see videos like that, be sure to subscribe to Jackson's Warfield, and I'll see you in the next video.
Eyes wide open. Now everything has changed. I'll show you love. I'll show you everything with arms wide open.